Well, the armed group Hamas has published a 16-page document on the reasons that led to its operation, called the Al-Aqsa Flood, on October 7th. They stated that their operation was defensive in response to the Israeli occupation. Hamas said its fighters never targeted civilians intentionally, while their deaths may have been accidental, adding that many armed settlers fought alongside the Israeli army. Well, let's bring in Antony Loewenstein now. He's an independent journalist and author of The Palestine Laboratory. He joins us live from Brisbane. Welcome to the programme. So, to what extent do you think has Israel not managed to achieve its stated military goals in Gaza?
Well, I guess in some ways it depends what those goals were. I know Netanyahu and the government said from the beginning the goal was to destroy Hamas and remove it from power. But I would argue, in fact, one of the goals, in fact, was more than that. And that's based on huge amounts of Israeli military figures and Netanyahu himself, and frankly, huge amounts of Israeli soldiers who are shamelessly putting on social media what they're doing. The aim is to make Gaza unlivable. And if that is a key goal, they are well on the way to achieving that. Now, Hamas as a political and military force is obviously still standing. I would argue that in time, Hamas militarily is likely to maybe survive in some force, but politically to run Gaza, I would say, is highly unlikely. But there's no doubt what I'm hearing. The Wall Street Journal piece you mentioned before, the New York Times, an interesting piece on the weekend also, which was Israeli government military documents that the paper got access to, saying that, according to their own predictions, they haven't made as much progress as they were hoping at this point. So Israel's in a real bind.
What about the timing, then, of the release of this Hamas document? How significant is this?
Look, I think the document makes for interesting reading. If you look at the history of what the document says about decades of occupation, Israel not being serious about peace, the aim to impose a blockade on Gaza, all that is undeniably true. The description of what happened on October 7, like anything, most information in war is propaganda. That's on the Israeli side, of course, but also Hamas. To suggest that any civilian killing was, quote, accidental is frankly ludicrous. I mean, that's just not believable at all. But I think in some ways Hamas realises that their ability to control and be the governing power in Gaza is undeniably under threat. Yes, Israel hasn't achieved all of its aims, to be sure, and I think Hamas will not be destroyed entirely because, as we know, its base is not just Gaza, but places in the West Bank and elsewhere. But ultimately, I think Hamas feels under pressure, that they know that Israel will, as I've been saying for months now, Israel will spend years going after every major Hamas leader across the Arab and Muslim world, killing them, is what I mean. Not that dissimilar to what Israel did after the 1972 Munich Olympics, where they went after for years key Palestinian members who were behind that and also killed many innocent people in the process. That is what Hamas is facing. And I think they are, frankly, both determined but also, frankly, scared. They won't admit that, of course, but that's the fact. Israel is not being stopped.
OK, let me just ask you, let me just jump in there and ask you, what do you think Hamas's strategy will be now militarily then, going forward, even as we see the continuing Israeli assaults on the ground?
Look, classic insurgency. You know, Israel is facing what the US faced in Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, where you have Israeli troops who, frankly, do not have the experience in insurgency. They don't. They're mostly reservists. They have not got that years of battle-hardened experience. So what Hamas's role has been, pretty much since the beginning, on an equal matching, Hamas cannot win. I mean, militarily, like with the US in Iraq and Afghanistan, the US has much more overwhelming firepower. But however, what Hamas can do and has been doing very successfully from their perspective is essentially using huge amounts of tunnels, of course, disappearing and appearing above ground and disappearing underground again, killing a large number of Israeli soldiers, no doubt far more than Israel's acknowledging, injuring thousands and thousands. And that strategy, if you can call it that, is working to the point where, just like in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's a realisation that Hamas knows Israel is not going to put in hundreds of thousands of troops indefinitely to hold ground. So as we're seeing in northern Gaza in the last few days that Israel had claimed for weeks was under their control, Hamas is now reappearing, trying to re-establish governmental and also military forces.
Well, indeed, when you look at when you look at the Wall Street Journal report, I mean, Hamas clearly is still existing in the north, isn't it?
Very much so. And obviously the strength of it is on one level difficult to say. And when we talk about US intelligence, like any intelligence, can be politicized, and US intelligence is being used to bolster the Israeli case. So we always have to be careful of what those leaks reflect. But there's no doubt that Hamas still exists in the north and obviously the south and the center of Gaza. And of course, what Israel is facing in Gaza, again, is similar to Iraq and Afghanistan, a civilian population that hates it with a passion. Doesn't mean everybody in Gaza supports Hamas. Many, in fact, do not. But they don't support what the Israelis are doing. And therefore, that makes it, frankly, close to impossible to maintain and hold ground. And without that, and also maintaining and holding ground is a vision that many in the Israeli public have. Often we talk about Netanyahu and the Israeli government wanting to occupy Gaza indefinitely. The fact is, according to a public opinion polls, many Israeli Jews do not believe that there should be an independent Palestinian state. And in fact, Israel should have the right to maintain some kind of military control indefinitely. That's the mainstream Israeli Jewish position. So Israel is facing a real problem here, that if they want to get their roughly 132 hostages out, unless there is a negotiation and a permanent ceasefire, it's almost certain those people will not come home alive.
OK, we'll have to leave it there. Antony Loewenstein, we appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.